Second, approve the agenda.
Approval. Second.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? That carries. All right. Item 3, approval of the meeting minutes. Any changes to those?
Well, I don't, just one change. I don't think Russ Trimble was present for the.
Okay.
Oh, way to get the details there, buddy.
Nice.
Wow, done.
We don't want to give
I
Rusty
mean,
a
it
credit.
stuck out like a sore thumb. I mean, we had heard, you just have to read it. Oh.
Okay, with that change, any other changes? Is there a motion then with the change?
I'll move approval with
All right.
that change.
I'll second. All right, motion to second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any abstentions? Motion carries. All right. Item 4 is the approval of the financial statement.
All right, so the finance subcommittee met last week. We had a couple of new members with Len and Courtney. And so we're trying to put together kind of the structure going forward, how we're going to be, how often we're going to be meeting, what we're going to be going over, things of that nature. With respect to the financial statement, the subcommittee decided it wanted a couple of things each month, fiscal year to date, budget to actual, a statement of financial position, and then a monthly transaction list by vendor, so by vendor and amount. And we receive that monthly so that those can be reviewed. We just, after some discussion, decided better to have more transparency than less, right? So, we're going to start receiving these each month as a subcommittee, review them each month, so that they can then be approved by exec. So it did pass unanimously. Any questions on that?
I had a question on MPO revenue and member, appreciate the information, by the way. Thank you. Thanks for the work you guys did. When we are assessed as a city for our member assessments for MIPA, is that under member assessments revenue, which is MPOs, I assume? Or when you say MIPA revenue, does that include revenue it brings in and our assessments? Where are our assessments?
NIPA assessments are done in NIPA. It's completely separate. The revenue is what NIPA pays the MPO.
The revenue, okay. So where do I find the assessments that we pay MIPA? Is MIPA on a separate financials?
Right.
Are we going to see those? Or did I miss those?
It's just getting rid of the board.
That would be the board.
Oh, gotcha.
See, MPO does that
That's
work, but it's.
Gotcha. All right, thank you. Appreciate that. Nope, that answered my question.
Any other questions?
No, but I appreciate where we are and being able to participate because this is really what I was looking for. So thank you very much for all that work. And it's coming directly from the finance system instead of being transposed to forms.
There's probably still some cleanup that needs to happen, but we're getting
Much better.
Yeah, we had a lot of good commentary and a lot of good feedback to staff at our last subcommittee. So I think we'll be better positioned moving forward.
All right. Any other questions or comments? But that is our motion.
I'll move the approval of financial statement.
Okay, for a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Pose same sign. Abstentions. That carries. Item 5, contracts and expenses. Todd.
Yeah, thank you. Just one item. I think there's one item. Yeah. The legal fees, some of the 2080 review for Denton Davis Brown. Next one slide. Is there another slide? No, that's it. So that's the only one we'd recommend approval. Happy to answer any questions.
What is 5,700? The 2080? I mean, are we changing it now or what are we doing, Todd?
That was the review of the 2080 in relation to contracts, the time that Scott and his associates spent on reviewing that and developing the response to that.
That's a nice fee.
We had the video. I'm just curious. What are you charging an hour to the MPO? I'm just curious.
I believe that it is way below my hourly rate. I believe it's $220 an hour.
That sounds right.
a lot of hours. I mean, that's a lot of hours. You had to put in the $220 an hour to go through our 2080 agreement.
So my bills on things like this are broken out by, tenths of an hour, I bill in tenths. And so, it identifies all the tasks performed. And so the full bill, which I provided the MPO, has it all broken out. You can see the tasks and who performed the tasks.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not questioning that your tasks. I just wondered how in depth and what we were. Yeah, that's fine.
All right. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Is there a second? Second. Okay, motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? That carries. Okay. Item 6 is public comment of MPO actions. Is there anyone that wants to make any public comment at this time? We have anybody that requested? Okay.
Not aware of anyone.
All right, thanks, Todd. We'll move on then to the report and vote on the fiscal year 22 audit. Ted, you want to take that?
Yeah, so everyone should be familiar with the audit at this point. We've gone over that review. Again, as a subcommittee, we talked about it. I think the biggest thing with respect to the audit is we don't want to, there were a couple small things that every organization is going to have that we need to deal with. And the main thing that as a subcommittee we talked about is making sure we have processes in place and milestones or guideposts in place throughout the year to make sure that when we get there next year for the audit, we don't have the same issues arise, right? So we're not surprised that we have, oh crap, we didn't fix those things. During the year, we're going to monitor that and make sure that we don't. Now that we have Ron in place, we're pretty confident and optimistic that we'll be able to address those issues. So that was the main thing with the audit with the subcommittee.
All right, thank you, Ted. Any further questions or discussions? You've now had it for review for a while. I know we had pretty extensive discussion with Denman at the time. Any further comments or questions on it? And is there a motion to accept it?
Move to approve.
Weaver.
Second.
Second by Dean. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? That carries. All right, then item 8 is a report and vote on the fiscal year 24 Unified Planning Work Program and Budget Draft.
All right, so again, we reviewed this at the finance subcommittee. First thing is, this is still just a proposal. It's not set in stone. If you recall, when we looked at it last month, that there were multiple scenarios that we looked at, lots of different hours identified with those. This is basically stripped down to the scenario of the MPO manages the contracts at SERPA and MIPA, but the housing related contracts get moved under MIPA, not the MPO. Right, so that is what this budget is based upon. And I think, and Dylan, you can correct me, this has to be presented to the DOT by next month.
By April 1st, yeah.
By the end of this month.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay, yeah. So we have to put forth a proposal for them to review, and so that's what this is based upon. So, I mean, any detailed questions, I'm sure Dylan can answer.
And I can walk through some of the information that's actually in the work program section of it, and then we can walk through some of the numbers if people want for the budget side of things. As we've noted in the past, the MPO has certain requirements, so this work program shows how we address all of those different requirements, such as the work program, the long range plan, congestion management process, and so forth. If you go to the next slide, we have been requesting from particularly our tech committees, projects and activities that they want to see from the MPO. Up on the screen are some of the notable or new projects that have been identified. In fall of 2024, our long range transportation plan is due for an update. So really starting about now, we're starting to work on that update because it takes 18 months to 2 years to do that. Some of the things we'll be focusing on in FY24 is the travel demand model update. And last month, we approved the contract with the consultant to do that. Also related to that is the growth scenario process. So this is where we look at how the region's growing and making some assumptions, and then we can tell what infrastructure needs to follow or lead, as the case may be. And also looking at our planning boundary update. This is something we do when we update the plan in general, but given that the census was recently completed and a lot of the things that impact us as far as what our planning area can be, stems from that. So this will be an effort that is going on, and this will all fall underneath that long range plan update. As we talked about last month too, we received the federal grant for the Safe Streets for All program. So that's a big work activity that will be taking place. A freight related project that's been suggested is a goods movement study update. The MPO periodically updates what we call a goods movement study, and this identifies where truck routes are, where impedances are. So maybe they're tight corners where trucks can't make the turn, and it slows down freight movement or makes them go on a different route. So identifying where those things are. We talked last month about the Green Iowa AmeriCorps being a host site for them and getting assistance from them, and in turn providing more sustainability related assistance to our member communities. And then a couple other environmental related things. Allison's been doing a lot of work on the greenhouse gas analysis and taking that more from a community level down to corridor level and showing what that is on a, as it affects transportation on a more of a corridor level. Also, stemming from the infrastructure bill is a carbon reduction strategy and implementation funding that comes along with that. So this is something where we have to figure out what that program is going to look like for us locally, and work with the DOT on how do we expend those funds that are going to start coming down to us. So that's not everything, but that's kind of the new and notable things. Any questions about those before we move on to the budget side of things? So if you go to the next slide, this is where we get into the budget. And as Ted mentioned, a lot of this hasn't changed a whole lot on the revenue side of things, or really on either side. It's just how it's all allocated. So total cost, you can see there broken down by salaries and wages for any correct. If you go to the next slide, this shows a little bit more of a breakdown of what those non-personnel costs are. So these are the costs that aren't shared across the other contracts we have with SERPA or MIPA. This would just be the costs that come to the MPO, but don't, they're more of the indirect costs. So certain sponsorships, consultant fees, those sorts of things. This is a little higher than it typically is, just because we did get that big federal grant for the Safe Streets for All. We've got some other contracted expenses in there for our travel demand model that we talked about last month. If you go to the next slide, this shows our revenue forecast. I'll note a couple things on the top there with the planning funds from the DOT. There you can see there's a couple. The second one on there, the FHWA PL set aside in the infrastructure bill. There was a provision that a certain amount of MPO planning funds have to be used on complete street projects, but that those complete street activities do not require a local match. So DOT just suggested that we carve those out specifically, and if you look through the budget, you'll see there's a line item in there that doesn't show any local match, and that's just coming from the Iowa DOT and how they want to see that. But I'll point that out. The other thing, like I mentioned, the Safe Streets for All program also falls in there. So those are two things that aren't typically in there, but are in there this year. And then local funding, these are assessments and any sort of contracts that we might have with, with SERPA and MIPA for sure, but also matches for the Safe Streets for All program as well. If you go to the next slide, the budget also includes reference and the budget for the water trails projects. These are big dollar amounts because of the big, the big funding from the DOT as well as the match for that. So we show this in our work program and in our budget, but it doesn't affect MPO operations. So we kind of hold them separately, but we just wanted to show this and acknowledge that that does go into the budget because it does affect our audit and everything else. If we do the cash flow for all that. So all that will be shown again on the financial statements that you'll be seeing too. But it doesn't, it's money that comes in and money goes right back out. So it doesn't really affect our operational funds at all. And then I think to the final slide, this gets more into just kind of summarizing everything there. So you can see work elements 1 through 6 up there on the screen are DOT or MPO, traditional MPO work elements. And we just divide things out, long range planning versus multimodal planning, funding and so forth. And then the bottom two, SERPA and MIPA. And then, like I mentioned, we have that complete streets work element in there 2A, and we also showed the Safe Streets for All as 1A, because that's just going straight to consultant costs. At the end of the year, we're projecting a little over $1,000 surplus after all of that. So with all that said, I'll be quiet and take any questions you might have, but I would note that the finance subcommittee as well as the technical committee recommended approval of the draft for submission to the DOT.
So what happens with MIPA if member communities drop out of MIPA? What happens with those numbers?
If the MIPA, well, the MIPA dollars, this is just what MIPA is paying to the MPO. So the MIPA budget's a totally separate thing that their board sees. These are just the funds that MIPA would pay the MPO for staff assistance as well as rent and that kind of thing. The MIPA assessments are 15 cents per capita, and they get roughly $120,000, I believe, that come in. So they would just get fewer assessments, and it would be up to the MIPA board whether they want to raise assessments or add additional contracts or whatever the case might be. So we'll have to, obviously, by the time this becomes final, depending on what happens on the MIPA side, this could affect what this, that line item for the MIPA budget looks like here, or for the MPO budget.
Does that affect any of the existing staff of the MPO then if the MIPA budget goes down?
It depends on what MIPA decides to do. Again, if they want to just fill that with extra contracts or raise assessments or something, then it wouldn't. If they really reduce it, then.
Okay.
But no.
So, but this is where I get completely confused. And so we're the MPO's board and we're sharing employees with MIPA, but we don't have any jurisdiction, or we're not on the board of MIPA. So we're not making any decisions for MIPA, but our staff is working for us, but then they're turning around and working for MIPA. So that's my brain start, and maybe I'm just slow and others can catch on to this, but I struggle with that. So I don't understand why. I don't get that. And I think that's where things have become really, really confusing for this organization. And I will say that till maybe I don't see MIPA up there anymore, and we're not sharing employees, and we're not together, because I can feel like this is, I mean, we are together, but we're not making any decisions for MIPA. You've referenced it a few times as, it's a separate board, you guys aren't doing anything.
Yeah.
But we're responsible as elected officials of what staff is doing. And so when staff's doing other things, we're all intertwined together here. Does that make sense? I mean, you guys, Todd, do you get
Yeah,
that?
I get what you're saying, Joe, and I understand what you're saying. And I think ultimately, once MIPA has its legs under it, you could see that, completely separated and away from the MPO. It's just, as we got this organization, as MIPA was formed and that agreement was made with the MPO to help do kind of the back end on helping with some of the staffing and managing the payroll and that type of thing. This is the situation we have for right now, but I think ultimately, after they, like I said, get their legs, they could peel off and be a completely separate organization. I mean,
Do we have an
could
estimate
have
on
the
that?
same issue with SERPTA to a certain extent as well then.
Do we have an estimate of what that, Todd, as to how long that we think that's gonna take? Is it a year? Is it 2 years? What does that look like?
I would say at least 2 years until they've got their funding situation stabilized and built up a little banking, and then it could be longer, it could be shorter, but I would guess at least 2 years.
I'm not sure how it could be. Well, I mean, you've already heard from multiple jurisdictions that once the money runs out for MIPA this time, June 30th, that some of us aren't going to participate in MIPA anymore. So I'm not sure how we can say that they're gonna be able to peel off and be on their own if they're gonna lose significant funding from jurisdictions that's not going to pay. Now, yes, they could raise it, but this is where our liability gets opened up, and we're not the board answering questions for MIPA. They're taking on other contracts, but we are the board of the MPO, and this is intertwined with the MPO. And this, I mean, that does not work for me. I mean, I've said it over and over. I don't know how we could separate it, but I don't know. That I can't get there in my head. There's
Can
too
you-
much liability.
Can you remind me who's on the MEPA board? Did the cities appoint somebody?
Yeah, we have a staff member that's on
It's a
this.
staff member.
Yeah, there's
It's
no.
up to each, it's up to each,
No,
yeah.
some of them are. I'm one.
Okay.
Okay, I'm obviously did that and don't remember. All right. Happens a lot to me.
And the MPO's billing MIPA for staff time, so it's not like it's.
This is all a decision for you as the MPO board to make,
Yeah.
whether you want to continue with this contract.
And I think what we were talking about before, if we have all this extra staff time that we're just loaning out and selling to other people, then maybe we have too many staff.
Well, we only brought the extra staff on when we got the contract with MIPA. So I mean, the staff didn't come on until MIPA was that contract was finalized, and then we brought staff on to service MIPA. So,
But we've never been the board of MIPA. We're not making the decisions for the board, but we're sharing our staff and we're sharing our liability. Are we sharing our legal also? Or do they have their own? I mean, is Scott looking over legal things for MIPA also?
he does review those, and those get charged to MIPA.
Okay, so that wasn't part of the 26 billing hours to look over the 2080 agreement, right?
No.
That wasn't part of it.
Joe,
That wasn't part of it.
it was not.
Okay.
So can I ask, is MIPA its own separate actual legal entity? I know it has its own board. So it's
Yes,
its own-
it is.
Okay, and is there a written agreement then, this contract type that you referenced between the MPO and MIPA?
Yes.
And that written agreement spells out how, I mean, I guess I'm sensitive to what Joe's talking about in terms of, is there shared liability between these two organizations, or have we legally separated that?
They are. The MIPA employees, the work, it's via contract, so it's typical contract. So I mean, MIPA is, excuse me, has the liabilities relating to the MIPA employees.
Do you have concern, wearing the MPO hat, do you have concern that the MPO is liable for anything that MIPA does?
I do not at this point. I mean, they're separate organizations. MIPA is a nonprofit corporation organized under the Iowa code, and the MPO is a 28E. They can contract together, and they have contracted. But it's an employment contract to have and do some services for MIPA.
This is a quick question. So it's a little bit more convoluted even for me, and I've mentioned this before, but I think we're mentioning again that. And at the end of this fiscal year, I don't believe that Polk County will stay a part of the organization. And, a lot of things we talked about here, it seems like it's a specific duplication for Polk County. I can't speak for other counties or even maybe some other jurisdictions. But when we start talking about, economic development, Polk County gives partnership $250 million a year to do our economic development. You talk about housing, we put 1.5 million in the Polk County Housing Trust, 1 million in the neighborhood finance fund every year. So we're already dumping millions and millions of dollars into these things. And just recently this week, the partnership engaged in a study that we helped pay for on broadband service. And the partnership completes the study, not criticizing the partnership, but they complete the study and they hand it to the MPO. The MPO hands it to MIPA. And so I got MIPA contacting me about signing off on letters that they're applying for some grant for broadband. When at the end of the day, if you follow along with broadband at all, you understand that the private sector is not going to make investments in infrastructure to go to some of these areas until you find a way to find the revenue from somewhere from the private sector that does the actual installation of infrastructure is the only way you're going to impact broadband. So thinking, okay, the partnership can have a study and they can hand it off to y'all. And then y'all say, well, this might be a better job for MIPA. Thinking, okay, I can follow the money. It becomes very convoluted.
And that was related to the funding source that,
Continue to fund.
you know, some ADA programs were the funding source for potential projects to install that infrastructure in the more rural areas, and that's why it seemed better suited for MIPA than the MPO or a partnership to look into those programs.
But their study didn't show just rural areas, Todd. It
I know
showed
it-
areas all over Des Moines and underserved areas of Des
Sure.
Moines. There are problems with connectivity and
Oh, yeah.
infrastructure improvements that the private sector has chosen not to invest in.
Yeah, no,
And
I agree. This particular program, though, that I'm speaking of, looked at more rural areas.
One you had a comment?
I have some questions specifically about the work plan and the budget.
Okay,
If I can get to those.
sure.
Table 4, there was discussion in our finance subcommittee about moving some of what is currently identified as fringe benefits, which is time off, paid time off, the way it's listed, back into the salary line. This new document does not reflect that, and I understand there's some pieces there. But if we're not doing that, then each of these other program areas is not sharing in that overhead. That's becoming an MPO only expense for time off, vacation leave, etc. It was recommended that those items be backed out of the employee benefits in table 4, so that the actual employee benefit to salary ratio in table 5 was changed. I thought we had all agreed to that, but that did not, that's not reflected here.
The subcommittee, or the subcommittee did talk about that and said that's not how they, when they weren't expecting to see that in there. But they did say if that's been working for DOT, don't change it, like, if they're okay with that. So that is something that we left in there, so that we didn't make a change between when subcommittee saw it and this group sees it. But that is something we will continue to explore, and we need to work with DOT to understand just what you're saying. How do we keep it so that that can be shared across those various contracts, or was DOT, or?
That was my concern, is now the MPO is paying for all the vacation, sick leave, and
No.
quite frankly, that should be shared among all of those entities that were contracted.
Right, payroll tax, workers' comp, I mean, all of the above, we are. So, go ahead, Lou.
Another item on that initial piece, talks about the executive, talks about, car allowance for the executive director. And looking at that at 65.5 cents at the 2023 mileage rate, that's 9,160 miles driven. If the executive director does not work from the MPO office, does not attend meetings in person, I don't know why there's a car allowance in there for $6,000. I think that needs to be discussed in some fashion. I don't understand if we're not driving related to MPO business, why are we paying a car allowance? And then on table 8, the staff hours by contract. I note the executive director now has no responsibility to MIPA. That's obviously been delegated to Dylan, and by contract, I read the contract, he's allowed to delegate. So that's not the question. The question is, we're only talking about 1% of time. So when you really start to look at that piece, you've got 2 employees that are really doing MIPA work out of 12. So more like 8 to 16% of that supervision should be a MIPA piece in my mind. Plus, we moved the housing contracts over there. There's additional responsibilities, obviously, for you for preparing for meetings, etc. Shouldn't that be more evenly divided between the MPO and MIPA as far as time? And then you get to the accountant, which we're talking basically the same thing, even with CERTA. More time is being spent, I think, than what we're showing on this sheet to service those other areas. I can't imagine that the accountant, we're saying 96% of times the MPO, 3% is CERTA, and 1% is MIPA. When the responsibility for those contracts is moved over, there's accounting, financial pieces, financial reporting requirements with CERTA that's separate than the MPO, and the same thing with MIPA. I think those numbers need to be revisited. I mean, I've done some calculations. I don't think we're being fair in our accounting of some of that with these other groups.
Yeah, we'll continue working on it.
I mean, can NIPA just have their own, like, pay their own employee and just be separate and just take the person that we hired and just pay them and pay their benefits, pay their payroll taxes, pay their workman's comp and just out of the MPO? I mean, can we not do that? Is it not sustainable to do that? And then I know you've got your hours and now we're sharing other hours and so, I mean, but the one person that was particularly hired for MIPA, can they just like not be an employee of the MPO and be an employee of MIPA and just be done with it?
But we also have a senior planner that 100% of their time is in MIPA. So, I mean, it's almost like you gotta move 2 employees and contractually right now, what we're saying, supervision has been, that commitment for supervision is to the MPO and the accounting piece is to the MPO. So, I mean, you have to separate quite a
Then,
few.
then maybe they can pay us for your particular time and for
And they
her
do.
time.
Yeah.
As, and then take the other two employees off of the MPO payroll and put them on MIPA and just separate it. So there isn't a liability. The only liability, I guess, would be for you and her, and then as you guys work through it over the next couple of years, I don't know how you do that. Maybe the board hires someone to be the director of MIPA and they get enough contracts and things are going great and they're able to do those things. And then we don't have it's not intertwined with the MPO. That's what we're having, that's why we're all like this. And we're not getting it. Todd, you're not getting, I mean, that's why we're butting heads here every time we bring this up. And nothing's changing. I mean, I got crickets.
I'm comfortable with where we are in that path forward, but it's not gonna happen overnight.
Well, it's a legitimate question though. I mean, is that a possibility though?
Yeah,
That way no one's losing their job. MIPA's gonna pay for it. We're good.
so the way that just to the payroll question now, the MIPA employee does have their own separate payroll. They're a MIPA employee. We manage the system.
Right.
Just like a separate, we talked last month, we use Paylocity. There's a separate Paylocity that they put their time in, the MPO staff puts their time in the other thing, 2 separate check, like it's not,
It comes out
they
of
are
their
separate.
bank account. It
Yeah,
comes
their
out
bank
of
account and
this.
everything like that. So the contract that we have covers
Right.
providing office space to them and equipment and that kind of stuff, which they didn't pay for. The supervision and accounting services and that sort of thing. And then also supplemental planning assistance. So that'd be just, if they need some extra help on an actual planning thing, we can do that too. So there's administrative staff costs, but also planning staff costs. At any time, either board could, and it's a contract between the two. So that's where we've just been looking for direction. Is it, do you want to continue this contract? Do we want to continue it with the idea that it steps down over a period of years? Which seems to be the direction, and that's kind of the direction we've been taking too. But until there's a formal vote to nullify that contract, we have to honor that contract and continue doing these services.
Well, I'm not looking to have this thing stick around and we talk about this for 2 more years. I can tell you that, so.
Well, when's the contract up? End of the fiscal year?
It is
30th?
it's an ongoing contract, just either party needs to provide however many days, 60 days notice or whatever it is.
So we can either end the contract as an MPO board, or we can not fund MIPA through your city route. Either.
Well,
But you
Probably
gotta,
both.
yeah, probably.
And to your question too about could MIPA do it on their own? They could, it would just be more expensive. That's why there was this arrangement, because it would help them get their feet wet and. As one of the MIPA board members said, MIPA is just a baby. They gotta grow up a little bit first before they can stand on their own.
I don't think there's a lot of appetite for a 3-year transition plan or something that's indefinite, right? I think
Right.
there need to be something that's more concrete that says, okay, we're gonna renew this July 1st for 1 year. You've got a year to get yourself up and running or something like that. Me personally, I think it would be bad business just to pull the rug out from under them. Let's give them some transition time. I don't know if that means a year. I don't know if that's sufficient, but I think there has to be an end date. And
I
there has
thought
to be a
June
goal that
thirtieth
they
would
work
be
for.
appropriate time. Ted, would be what I would suggest. I mean,
Say that again?
that's not pulling the rug out if we give them until the end of this fiscal year to figure it out. I mean, I'm not, I don't want to do it for another year. I'm not comfortable with it, but I'm just one person. But I'm not comfortable with it, and if we could have ended it tomorrow, it would have been done, but we've already paid until June 30th, and so. I thought last time, the last meeting we had, we just kind of said, your grace period is till June 30th, you're gonna have to figure out there. And we give the notice and we dissolve our contract with them.
Let me make a suggestion on how we proceed. I'm just
Okay.
looking at this procedurally. First of all, the item that we're talking about and what we need to take action on today is on the unified work plan, all right? We need to have this into the DOT, at least a draft by the end of this month. My suggestion would be we approve the draft on the April exec meeting agenda, and then, and we don't have policy this month. This is the only meeting this month, so on the April agenda, we bring up the MIPA contract for review and discussion and action, possible action. That would be on the executive committee meeting agenda for April, as well as the policy committee meeting agenda. That'd be the opportunity to discuss it directly, review it, and take action if necessary by both the executive committee and the policy committee.
I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. I think you probably move on from this. The only thing I would say is, for the record, having talked to my colleagues, that if I vote in support of this item, that does not indicate support for the work plan, including MIPA. Now, I can vote no if you like, but I just do move ahead. But we have a resolution drafted. We're ready to drop that, not based on any discussion that we have at the MPO. We will not consider, we won't even consider being members after the end of this fiscal year. So that's just an action that we have to, the Polk County will have to take internally. And just a call, any jurisdiction here can make that call, any jurisdiction as a member of government can make that decision. That's up to everyone individually.
And this is
We
the
intend to do the same thing. I mean, that's our intention also.
again, this is what the action item for that we are on right now is the budget draft. This is the only draft. We can also revise this by June 1 as well. So based on what action, if any, is taken on the MIPA contract, we can revise this, but we do need to approve a draft today.
Well, I will move it, based on the comments that I just made as part of the record.
All right, motion by Hawkinsmith,
And I'll second it with the same comments about MIPA and not, this isn't, I'm not comfortable with it.
all right. Second by Gatto, is there any further discussion? When?
I'm going to vote no, because I still think that work plan needs to be adjusted and fixed. And I think that question about mileage needs to be addressed in some fashion. My approval would be basically blanketly saying I'm okay with the way it is right now, and I'm not.
Okay,
And I would agree with Lynn. I mean, some of the questions that he asked about mileage and things, but I think that's a different conversation.
that's, but again, this is a draft form, you vote how you want. Well, I guess I would say this is a draft. With your comments noted, you can either vote yea or nay, but we do need to have a draft submitted and approved by today. So.
Agreed.
We have a motion and second, right? Yeah, motion and second, any further discussion? I'll call the vote, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign,
Aye.
any abstentions? All right, that motion carries. We'll move on then to item 9, and that's the report and vote on the water trails build grant payment approval. And Todd,
Thanks. We received a payment submission from Snyder and Associates. This would be payment number 2. It was some of the tree removal work that was done along the project banks. The amount was $14,398 and change. It was reviewed by the consultant, Snyder and Associates, as well as Polk County. They are in concurrence with the amount. We would recommend approval of payment number 2. Happy to answer any questions.
Move approval, second.
Motion and a second, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Abstentions? Okay, it carries. Item 10 is report and vote on the fiscal year 22 excess funding, Zach.
Thank you. Staff has reviewed the targets that were submitted to us by the DOT for federal fiscal year 2027 STD funding, as well as the excess funding that was remaining in 2022. So if you'll recall, we have a policy that will review excess funding on an annual basis. And we'll bring any of that information to the executive policy committees to review. We look back at 2021, you can see there on the for you that the balance of the fund was actually negative. We when the DOT originally gave us our target for federal fiscal year 2021, it was 13.8 million, and then when they gave us our final target, it was 12.9. So we had awarded out more funding in that year than what our final target ended up being. Looking at federal fiscal year 2022, our balance was a positive 2.1 million. So for the excess funding award, what we considered this year, we took the balance of 21 and 22, added them together, and we have $1.2 million available in federal fiscal year 2022 in excess FTBG funding to award out. So this will go to the funding subcommittee at their meeting tomorrow. They will review the projects that are in the TIP currently, the last 3 years of the TIP, which is what our policy indicates. And they will determine how to award out this excess funding, and then that recommendation will filter up to the exec and the policy committee at their April meetings. Again, this is all based on the excess funding policy, and part of that policy is to make you aware of the excess funding that is available. If it is over 250, it is over 250, so that's why we have brought it for you today. Just want to make you aware that the funding subcommittee will be making that recommendation at their meeting tomorrow. I'd be happy to take any questions you have.
So Zach, did you let the committee know before this agenda came out that there's an excess
Or
or?
funding subcommittee?
Yeah,
Yes, they're aware it was on the agenda,
really?
the funding subcommittee agenda.
Before, I mean, Scott Sanders said that wasn't on there until. For tomorrow's meeting, Zach? Are you talking about?
Tomorrow's meeting, yeah. The agenda was sent out last week.
Okay.
It was on the agenda.
He showed it to me and he was like, he didn't. He would have liked to know a little bit beforehand, but I guess he got it last week. Maybe he didn't have a chance to take a look at his emails or something, but he noticed it as we went through this agenda that it was on there, so.
We put it on the agenda for the meeting tomorrow, which was sent out last week.
Okay.
We discussed it with Tom Haddon, the chair of the funding subcommittee.
So Tom did know. But
Tom knew, I knew last week.
Okay, so that's what we wondered, if just maybe the chair did.
This has happened in the past, hasn't it? Where you don't get it with additional funding after, like, it came up. You came up with this number probably after our first meeting with the SCBG funding subcommittee, right?
Yep, the targets came out after that.
So, yeah, but it was not during the presentations, I don't think. Do we know it then?
We did not know it then, no. We knew, I think we got the targets maybe 3 or 4 days after the presentation, if I'm remembering correctly.
And it's not, again, frankly, it's not a huge amount, but there are a lot of projects that are eligible for it, that it's. That the committee needs to make a recommendation to here, and then we'll take it on to policy after that.
But a smaller community thinks it's a lot.
Well, you know, I mean, it's not insignificant, I correct that grant, I'm just saying.
I'll take it if you want to give it away.
Dean said he said tomorrow.
It's not With that, is there a motion?
Oh, it's
It's just a report, isn't it?
Yeah.
I thought we had to, okay, I thought we,
Since vote.
we had a report and vote, I thought we had to
All right.
approve it.
Move to approve.
Second.
Or not? Just a report?
I think it's just your report.
Mine says
Voting item.
What Todd would you say?
It's a voting item.
It's a voting, that's what I thought, I have a report and vote, so.
Well, just the one that we got it's on my email, it just says report, so I guess this one, I did see the one that I grabbed today, it does say report and vote, so.
Cover says vote.
But we're voting on just the excess funding piece.
Yeah, that's correct.
Oh, my.
All right, so Dean, did you move it? Okay, is there a second?
I'm hanging there with my motion.
Second by Lynn. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Need to add Gatto to the email list.
No, I don't need it, it's
Any abstentions?
my city manager.
Motion carries.
Maybe.
Item 11 is a report on the DC list of community projects. Gunnar.
Good afternoon, everyone. Brief update on the DC list. As you know, we're preparing for the trip coming up in May. Hope to see several of you on that trip. This year, we are seeking out only the projects that are actively seeking funding, this being with return of earmarks of community project funding. We are asking for materials to be in by March 17th. That is tied in with the updated deadlines that we received from the offices of Congressman Nunn as well as Congresswoman Miller Meeks. They're thinking to have their requests in by March 15th and 16th respectively. These deadlines along with the updated guidance from those offices were shared with our technical committees. Your staff should have them. And what I'll say at this point is we continue to develop the DC. This draft here is on your screen. I realize this is much too small for you to read. So I did break them out in a few different categories. These are the community project fundings requests that we've received today. We're asking people to fill those in with us. And what we're doing is any transportation related, we're including in our.
It's in alphabetical order, don't worry about that.
So this is not a complete list. We do anticipate more of these coming in as we get in toward the deadline. I heard from Herta actually this morning, so I anticipate a couple of projects from them up there. And I would encourage you, if you have community projects that you're submitting, please send them our way and we'll add anything transportation related to the MPO.
So you haven't had anyone submit the Southeast Connector? I mean, I've said it how many times?
It's been raised as it's been submitted as a raised grant.
So is that a priority or?
The DC list is anything actively seeking funding.
Okay.
These are all the requests that we received to date on community project requests. I don't think there was doing a community project request on this for Southeast Connector.
Okay.
Other funding requests, including raised bus and bus facilities, are reflected here. We've received word of 4 different raised grant applications, including City of Moines and Postville for Southeast Connector. That's obviously airport terminal seeking funding. I don't know if they haven't shared a particular program they're targeting at this point, but then DART is also seeking funding for their bus festival. Lastly, we'll point out a couple of, we'll label general policy.
What was the ask for the airport again?
They haven't shared a specific number or specific funding program that they're going for this time around. I've been in contact with Brian. He hasn't shared any particulars about mask yet, but we have it on there.
You identify it as a priority.
Yes. And then lastly, a couple of policy issues. Obviously, we are familiar with the Future 455 interstate designating effort. And then also the East Polk County interchange effort is brought to our attention. I've included it here as opposed to with the funding ask because there is no funding ask as of yet.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other ones speaking?
Not at this time, Mr. Chair.
That's what I have for an update. I'm happy to take any questions for you. This will be work in progress through the middle of March as the community projects come.
All right, thank you, Gunnar. Any other questions for Gunnar on this? All right, thanks. And 12 was a report on the employee handbook. We've all received the employee handbook for review. This was requested. This is not an action item, but there was some discussion on employee handbook. It's here for we can have some discussion on it today. This is not, again, not an action item. If there are any questions, we can, Todd or Bill or anyone can answer questions on the employee handbook. We can talk about where we proceed from here. Historically, this has not been an action item of the exec or the policy committee, but we can certainly discuss that. So with that, I'll open it up for discussion.
I do have a few things. I noticed the date on this one's 2023. Has it actually been reviewed by somebody in legal that actually deals with employee handbook kinds of things? Talking more about expertise in work policies, rules, etc. Because as I'm going through there, I find a couple of things that I question. Under 4E4, the performance recognition leave, which is only for exempt employees, which I assume probably the only two would be the director and assistant director. Are there other exempt people? For all. So that can be for anyone. Then I question the legitimacy of performance recognition leave, because quite frankly, the public sector, that is a no-no. In the private sector, maybe it's more frequently used. But trying to make that decision, what's the criteria? Again, the fairness to other employees that could be impacted by such decisions. My work is favored, yours wasn't, kind of mentality. It can affect employee morale. I'm not sure that is something that should be there. Plus, there's absolutely no accounting for who received it. It's not being put into any MPO tracking device, so we don't know who's all sharing in that or not sharing in that. I just question that whole paragraph. On military leave, I'm not sure that we're actually up to what is required by Iowa code or the federal government concerning, because it says in here, once you return from leave, you will need to apply for reemployment to the MPO, but the earlier statement says that at the conclusion of your leave, you have the right to return to the same position held prior to the leave or to a similar position with equivalent pay, seniority benefits. So I think there's one, it's kind of conflicting statements. But the other piece of it is, I think under federal and state law, you're going to find you have to give them their job back. And then 6B4 coverage during leave absence without pay. And then it talks about the MPO's group insurance plan is available for up to 1 year. Some military tours of duty now, because they're so reliant on the National Guard and Reserve component, some of those tour duties are longer than a year. So I think that needs to be amended. And we should be more clear on, quite frankly, those that have those group policies that are taking care of their family as well, family plans. What benefits do they have while that individual is actually deployed? Does that carry on? And there's some formal language in the federal government's piece about how that gets charged back. It's not a freebie necessarily. The employee may have to provide some portion of that funding, especially for family plans. And then under chapter 10, separations and disciplinary actions, layoff, recall, reduction in force. I really have a bigger question of who approves the filling of positions and the timing of such hires based on budget considerations. Because I know most of our city governments, when we have a vacancy, we look, do we have the funding to keep that person if we hire somebody? So we're not laying them off 3 months later because we're out of money kind of thing. And really, does the executive or policy committee have some level of oversight or approval for the creation of new positions or before filling a vacant position? And then I notice Appendix A, the remote work policy. I'm not sure when it was written, and from what I'm understanding from Bob, there's never been a formal approval process behind this workbook. I think there probably should be by this group. And I note the executive director has the authority to approve employees to work remotely. My question is more, who approves the executive director's ability to work remotely? Is that this body? Because it really is not spelled out who has the authority to make that decision.
Okay. Here's my suggestion on this is, this has been presented. One good comments. I appreciate truly your comments and your review of everything else. what if we had set up a subcommittee to take a deeper dive into this and come back to this committee for our recommendation? And I assume you'd be willing to serve on that?
Most definitely.
Okay. Is there anyone else that would want to serve on
Whole bunch of people hiding their faces.
I'll help serve on it. Diligently keeping my hands down. So we don't have to do it. Anyone move down there?
that? Ideally, we'd have 3 to take a look at this and come back.
Get someone else, or not, can you get someone on policy?
I'll do it.
Get 3 of us. I'll do it.
We can look at Paul. We'll do the 3 of you. Why don't we do this?
Fine.
Let's appoint a subcommittee. And can review and discuss it and come back to exec with some comments and recommendations. From what I understand, Todd, we had anybody from a legal standpoint review this?
They've reviewed pieces of it over time, not this version of the whole thing. We have reviewed it through SHARM, which is the Society of Human Resource Managers. That's where a lot of some of the changes have come from. But we can certainly have Scott review it again.
Subcommittee, you meet, discuss it, come back with a recommendation. How's that sound?
All right, Scott, not 26 hours.
I'm not in front of her. I will not be reviewing.
All right, item 13, the report on the policies and procedures manual, Todd.
Yeah, thank you. We had a lot of discussion at the February policy and exec meetings about this and have a lot of these policies that have been in place, but didn't have them all in one document. So we've pulled them all together into this guide that helps guide the MPO activities. Just wanted to share that with you and provide an overview of that today. There's some pieces that still need to be fleshed out a little bit. A lot of that dealing with some of the discussion earlier that we had with along with the financial reports and how those are presented and when they're presented. And so we want to flesh that section out a little more in detail. So we'll keep working with the auditor and the finance subcommittee to address those issues and make sure they're documented in how we go forward. What else is in there? Like I said, a lot of it is pulling together things that have been previously approved. If the board wishes to formally approve this document, we can bring that back in April for, kind of the first review for the whole policy committee and then on the May agenda potentially for approval. Hasn't been our typical operation. We've done it by policy, but I think it would make sense on a whole manual if that's the will of the board. Happy to answer questions.
I would just like to see it after he gets whatever changes he needs to make, have that brought back so we can at least review it.
Yeah.
And make a decision then.
And that's the intent in April is to add those items in for the
Right.
April.
We'll take a look at it at the April meeting. Then. This is any further discussion. All right, item 14 then would be a report on the Purple Heart Highway. Gunnar?
It's been a little bit quiet on this front for the last couple of months, and today we're going to have a more in-depth discussion. I have put the phases up here. We are still in phase 2, where we are in pursuit of state exemption and federal exemption that would make the corridor such that we could have interstate and for a stakeholder to use it. Today, I want to talk about 3 different points. First is a few notable updates that I'll share with you. Also want to talk about some potential next steps, and then we will be looking to you for some guidance going forward. Sorry. First of all, there's a few pieces of legislation that we had nothing to do with, but have popped up and will play some, could have some potential influence here. The first is some federal legislation introduced earlier this year called the Ship It Act by Representatives Johnson and Costa of South Dakota and California respectively. It does a lot of things that's targeted at the trucking industry and trying to improve the supply chain. But among other things, it would increase the national weight limit to 91,000 pounds. That's not a complete solution for the exemption that we need the Purple Heart Highway. Nevertheless, it shows some interest at the federal level. I did check in with our congressional delegation, or at least Grassley's office. This faces an uphill battle. The weight issue at the federal level is divisive, contentious, and so it's really hard to predict whether that goes anywhere or not. Nevertheless, I want to make you aware of it. Update number 2. I want to thank Councilmember McKinney for bringing this to our attention. There is a resolution at the Iowa legislature, symbolic in nature, but if it were passed, it would urge Congress to increase the national weight limit on interstates to 96,000 pounds. If this passes, and if Congress were to heed Iowa legislature's word, those are a couple of really big ifs, but if those things were to happen, that would be a big benefit to our Bard highway effort, because 96,000 is what the exemption would basically need to be for it to operate as an interstate using current trucks on there. And so if that were to happen, we wouldn't need that exemption. Again, I don't think it's likely, but I want to make this aware to you. And also, we're going to come back to this point when we ask for your guidance on whether or not MPO takes a position on this, on either of these two. Lastly, as you know, we've been engaging with stakeholders for some time, and the kind of last major engagement we had with them were in a pair of meetings in November and December of last year. And their next step was to reconvene, talk amongst themselves, and then provide us some feedback. We've been waiting for word on that for some time. As a result of the previous legislation we've talked about, I reached out to some of our key stakeholders, namely Bill Northey of the Agribusiness Association and Mike Steenhook of Iowa Soy Transportation, or excuse me, Soy Transportation Coalition. And they were able to report back that they had in fact had a subsequent meeting. They may have another. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But what we've learned is the notes and italics there are kind of the takeaways that were shared with us late last week. First and foremost, the people on the egg stakeholder side are feeling very positive about the interactions this time around versus previous efforts. And what we're hearing is that stakeholders are feeling a lot less hesitant or oppositional at this point. This is not an issue that the egg community feels like they need to champion or push or really support. But what they are saying is they might not stand in the way. So we've talked in the past that I don't think we're going to get a, parting seas type message to proceed. I think the message to proceed is going to look more like a yellow light. And I would say that this is probably our first yellow light. We would need to continue to proceed with caution. There's going to be more yellow lights along the way, but our read on this is that this is our first yellow light. So I want to talk about possible next steps. Obviously, we will continue to engaging with our egg stakeholders. That is ongoing. That continues to happen. And if we continue to feel there is support, or at least non-opposition, then I think it would be appropriate to start discussions at the State House about a potential speed exemption. To manage expectations, I think there's probably low likelihood that this is going to happen this year, but we can always start the conversation. So this is where we're looking for some guidance from you. One thing that we could consider doing is taking a formal position on the state or federal legislation. This would require staff to register as lobbyists. We've done that in the past. I have an open question to some of my egg stakeholders of whether or not they think it would be beneficial for us to weigh in support. So I think that's kind of an open question, whether they would want us to do that. So that's one area where we're looking for guidance. The other is looking for guidance on whether to proceed with conversations at the State House. Obviously, as we have been doing, we will continue to coordinate with stakeholders, making sure we're not getting ahead of them. And then you would continue to update the exec meeting only once a month. We would continue briefing KFG folks on executive committee in between those meetings, just to ensure there's oversight, guidance, et cetera, from our policymakers. That's what I have for you. At this point, I'm glad to take any questions, comments, concerns you might have. I also ask if Stephanie wanted to say anything, because she's been very active in this.
Sure, thanks, Gunnar. As Gunnar noted, we have momentum on this project. There could be an opportunity to get more involved with the Iowa State Legislature. I think it would be beneficial, and I would recommend that we authorize, I guess is the right word, staff to register as lobbyists so that they can represent the MPO and the member communities in any legislation connected with the Pleasant Park Highway. The staff members, it would make sense, probably Todd, Dylan, and Gunnar, because Gunnar's involvement in kind of leading this from the MPO internally. MPO board members also could be involved. If they are not, board members aren't required as elected officials, they're not required to be registered as lobbyists. So it would really just, as far as making sure that we're registered so that we can speak on an issue, take positions on any potential legislation, I think I would encourage us to approve registering as lobbyists. I think I said that 2 different ways, but that's all.
In the past, we've had the chair also.
Yeah, I think last time it came up when we registered, the decision was that the chair didn't have to register because they were elected.
Oh,
I
is that
don't know
right?
if that's.
That's why I was.
That's what's going on.
Sure, or we could do it in advance of cost.
So on the,
Matt, you comment on it?
well, I was just gonna say on the Iowa legislature, I don't know the federal stuff as well, but on, at least insofar as it relates to the 2 bills, there's, my understanding, there's 2 bills, one in the House, one in the Senate, both in the first funnel. And as I'm looking at it here, it does not appear that anybody's registered against it. We got a few folks that are for it. Yeah. I guess I'd be curious as to if the MPO pops its head up, is it going to create reason for some of the ag folks to maybe, will it draw attention in a manner that could negatively impact the current momentum, or the current, progress the bill has had? I don't know the politics on this.
I think, so my guardrail on that question is with our ag stakeholders, right? If they say, don't bother, we appreciate the offer, but sit low, that's what I would recommend doing. I do know that what you're describing does happen on other bills. And so sometimes Des Moines folks will intentionally sit out those things just so as to not draw attention to it. And that's not to say that, just because we don't get official support, doesn't mean we couldn't go speak favorably of it in an unofficial manner, so to speak.
Yeah, I guess that would be my concern, if it were to cause a red flag for some of the groups that are concerned about this designation, that they get in the way of this. It's out, I mean, from what it looks like on the outside, this is moving forward. And so, and it's done without our involvement so far. And I wouldn't want to, it sounds like it's a positive thing that it's happening, and I don't want to derail it. The second thing I'd say is, as it relates to this speed item, it's my understanding that speed item is a concern in the ag community. Is that right?
Yes, it has been.
Okay.
Yeah, and
And I'd be hesitant to bring that up until this bill got to a point in time where, it's either done or it's nearly done. Again, with the idea that you start talking about speed, and it's gonna say, oh, well, let's just stop this whole conversation. That would be my concern.
so I think the approach in that conversation would be protecting that speed issue on behalf of ag.
Okay.
Right, so I don't have a ton of concern about that personally. On the question of registering, my suggestion as staff would be to take our cues from the ag sector. I mean, if they really just be a good partner there.
So is that Farm Bureau? I mean, you're in contact with them and you're gonna contact them whether they want us to register this or
As
is it
stated,
just the others?
as stated, what I have to date is conversations with the ag stakeholders who we met with. And I'm still trying to understand all the context of what occurred at that meeting. I don't have full understanding of that yet. I got a very brief summary late last week. And I'm still reaching out. So I have emails outstanding that I need to get responses to before I have a full picture of who was in the room, what was said. So I'm still trying to learn those things. This was a development late last week. So was the Farm Bureau in the room? I don't know yet. What did they say? I don't know yet. Are those questions I've asked? Yes.
Okay. I appreciate the updates. I really do, because we kind of lost sight of that for a little bit. I think it's important for us to stay engaged Because the reality of it is, it usually takes a couple of cycles through the legislature before they really start paying attention to some of these things. And if we don't at least keep it in front of them, it's probably not going to go anywhere, or it'll delay it further. Right now, we're not showing any opposing groups, but that's a very dynamic picture as people begin to read things and assume things. And so I would look for giving the approval more from the standpoint of, if we start seeing opposition to these things, maybe we need to represent the other side of that to our legislators before they make any decision. So I'm in favor of allowing that to happen. But again, that doesn't mean we have to do it. It depends on the temperature, if you will, at that moment.
Yeah, so we're in kind of a dynamic period, right? I can't see what the next 30 days are going to bring. Also, I can't jump ahead to the April executive committee meeting and get all the approvals I need when I come back here. So I kind of have to come to you now, understanding that the next 30 days are going to be dynamic. We're gonna have to respond to the course that are out there. And like I said, we'll continue checking in with officers and keeping around.
All right. Great, thanks, Scott. And further comments on that? All right,
Is that something we need?
I think he's asking for whether we sign up. I mean, I kind of like Matt's lead. I mean, it's moved forward without us all jumping in. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it's a positive that we all, that the MPO signs up and says, yeah, we all want this. They look at it and they'll be like, oh, okay. And then the ag community gets fired up. I mean, I don't know.
if it's this dynamic, I guess, go ahead, Todd, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think we can go with kind of what, Matt and Joe and Len were saying, that, we can sit ready to act if we need to, but yeah, it seems to be proceeding. But then if some flag comes up, maybe then we step in after talking with Bob, Stephanie, and Ted, and anyone else that wants to be involved in that, whether we, then officially register for. But we can be all set, but we won't do anything until there seems to be a reason to get involved.
And we can certainly, obviously, keep everybody updated by email as well. If something moves before the next meeting.
Right.
Which is likely to do.
Yes.
Right.
So this group's cool if we register as lobbyists, just in case we need to do that.
Yes. Yeah, sure, you can.
This is the direction that we needed. Thank you.
All right, great, thanks, Connor. Then item 15 is report on the water trails, Zach.
I don't have a huge update on water trails. Just over the past few weeks, they've been working on the site. They've got, I believe, most of the clear treeing done in the area that they're working on currently. Snyder has been coordinating with them on this tree clearing. The things that are happening the next few weeks, the main thing is they're working to get their construction office set up. They currently don't have that set up, but they are working to get their office down there on site. I'm not sure if there's another slide on there. No, we do. I would note that we did get news that we do have another payment coming through. It's quite a bit larger than the payment we approved this month. I believe it's going to be about around $400,000. That'll be on the agenda next month for approval before we submit reimbursement on that one.
We may need to move that up to a special meeting, just depending on the contractors, how angry they get of us waiting till April to pay that. So I'm working that out with them now, so I'll let you know more.
What's the 400,000 for?
Some equipment, tree clearing, station issues, but some of those.
400,000 to clear those trees? I thought it was 14,000 that we just.
I believe it's more than just tree clearing. We haven't seen
It's
that.
more than the tree clearing.
They haven't did it.
I can get you the itemized list. I don't have it in front of me right at the moment, but we can certainly provide that.
I drive by it about 4 times a day, so I'm very familiar with the work that they've completed and the work that they've started. And they haven't really did much but put a temporary fence up and clear out trees.
Well, that's not according to the lady that keep calling my office on account of her eagles. And then
The Eagles are not, I did that too. The Eagles are not there anymore, and I've gotten plenty of those phone calls.
Yeah.
I get it.
Bad people, man.
But yeah, I mean, I just, okay. 400,000 and they can't wait until our meeting in April?
I'm working with them. I'd prefer they wait till April. I just wanted to give you a heads up in case they get a little testy with me, so.
So does all of this billing and when we start paying these, it goes through Snyder and it goes through Polk County before it comes to us? So someone else
Correct.
other than you and your staff is looking at it that has maybe some more experience in the construction portion of it, right?
Correct. Yep,
Bob
Bob Rice and his group, Aaron Putman, look at it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, item 16 on the legislative update, Bill.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of this we've talked about on the federal side already with the Ship It Act, the earmarks and DC list and so forth. If you go to the next slide, though, on the state side, obviously we're through the first funnel. So what Gunnar just talked about, that's the first one there. There's a few other things that were related to transportation that we showed you last time. So it's just kind of an indication of whether it's alive or dead. The very last one there, obviously, I think you're all pretty aware of the property tax related bills that go out there. I just bring that up because it could influence when we go to do our growth scenario or travel model, if these communities have to more restrict how they grow, that's going to affect how we do our transportation planning. So that's something we're keeping an eye on as well.
Yeah. No more roads for you.
All right,
That's all.
thanks, Bill. Item 17 is report on upcoming events, Allison.
Yep, not much for you. I did want to note that the electric vehicle for emergency response webinar we had last week is on our website. People did miss it. It was a really great conversation that was had with multiple jurisdictions around the Midwest. And really the only one that's upcoming this weekend is the All Irish Auto Show. And the IEDA is sponsoring an EV summit there as well. And so there's speakers. And I do believe Sue Anderson is even speaking on Friday afternoon about the NETI rollout statewide. So other than that, all the links are in your packet and do let me know if you have any questions.
Thanks, Allison. All right, any other items? Will we go to the order today?
No, just want to thank Allison for that electric vehicle workshop. It was very interesting. I learned a lot, so.
Watch it is informative.
All right, that takes us to the end of the agenda. We are adjourned. Next meeting, April 12th at 11:30. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.